now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce writer-director Neil LaBute. I became aware of his work in The Company of Men, which was at Sundance, I believe in 1997, where I saw it, and it was a very controversial film. Very controversial. I don't think that Neil is afraid of controversy. He writes things that are challenging, and I think we could use a lot more of that these days. Neil, welcome to the Film Threat Livecast. Appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about your film House of Darkness, starring Justin Long. Thanks for taking the time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Cool. Tell us what I've got to ask about In the Company of Men and whatnot, like when that came out. I remember that was the talked about film that year at Sundance. And people, I personally love that you were brave enough to make a film that made men look like assholes, which I think is kind of,
it wasn't that hard,
Yeah. But tell me,
the challenge was there, but it wasn't that hard.
But can you tell me a little bit about that experience and kind of like, because that was, at least, I don't know, is that your first film? Like
it was, yeah.
Yeah. Tell me about that.
Yeah, it was. Well, it was definitely a challenge because it was, as you say, first film, and I didn't come up through like music videos. There was a lot of people coming out of music videos at that time, or making short films from film school. I had come through the theater and jumped into making movies with just that picture, but it felt very much like a theatrical kind of film. I've often made things that are have a lot of dialogue and I don't move the camera a ton. So there's always been kind of a blend of those two mediums anyway. But it was made off the grid, for a small amount of money. And it happened to get into Sundance. And that's where the awareness came. Nobody knew about it. No one was waiting to see it. No one cared, really. It was just you go off like a lot of people and make a movie and you hope that someone gets to see it. And so that first audience was really like the first audience. And so I had no idea how the jokes would land, how the idea would work with an audience. It'd be fascinating for it to come out today, if it could even get made today. The concerns, I think, are as present now as ever, but that wild west of independent cinema at that time kind of allowed for all kinds of stories to be told, and that was refreshing. You never knew what you were going to get at Sundance. It was kind of a blast to be a part of that. So I was very lucky.
Is it possible you could make In the Company of Women?
I just may have. So
right. True.
So film goers can decide for themselves. At the time, I'd been asked that, could you flip the gender? And I thought, you could, of course, but it probably wouldn't work out the way it did in that film. There was sort of that competitiveness between men, that kind of wolf pack feel there. I had always thought if it was being done by a woman, it probably would have been a woman by herself, and she would have been playing the two guys against each other. And eventually, when I did this theater piece that I also filmed called The Shape of Things, I thought, now that's kind of the female version of In the Company of Men. That's maybe how a woman might operate, in that sort of deceptive way of like, you think I'm doing this, but this is what I'm really doing. This singular female running that game.
Yeah, the Shape of Things is brilliant. Paul Rudd in that is so fantastic.
So
and the
good,
fact
yeah.
that, God, he's so good in that. And I think that's another...
so good. You could just kind of leave it there. He's really just so good. He doesn't do as many dramatic pieces, but he's really good. And Rachel Weisz is, she's a dream. She was started it on stage and just, she's blossomed ever since then, but she's just great.
And I want to ask you also about Wicker Man. It's the Nicolas Cage with the bees has become kind of, that gets brought up a lot.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. That gets brought up a lot.
It's become like a meme, but obviously not your intention.
Oh, I hadn't seen it. No. Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course it has. Yeah.
Just how you felt about that, or is that just sort of like, oh, it's just like a lucky thing? It just reminds people, hey, see the Wicker Man.
They say that no press is bad press. There's an end to that probably where yeah, that felt like after a while there might be such a thing as bad press. It was it was a blast to make, and Nick is fantastic to work with, and had so many incredible ideas. He wanted to remake that film. He kind of promised Joey Ramone that he would, and he came to me and we talked about it. It was a movie that I had always thought could be remade, and we tried to find a legitimately different way to go about it. I think we ended up with a lot of cooks in our kitchen, and so we ever land the recipe just right? I don't know that we did, but it's a tough one to it's always it's easy afterwards to go, oh, this is what you did wrong, and this is what you did wrong. At the time, we were having fun and trying to make something interesting. Well, I mean, we knew there was going to be laughs. You can't send a man running around in a bear suit, hitting people without thinking that people may snicker at that. But we always knew that we were going to burn the guy in the end, and that hopefully the joke would catch in your throat. But I think it's that some of those things that people have come up with in posters and things are pretty hilarious. So if you can't roll with it, I think you have to be open with your work to go, yeah, this one went over the fence. This one was a bunt, and check out what your average is in the end. I don't know if I've mixed enough analogies there for you.
No, it's perfect.
With baseball and everything else.
Well, you've had the luxury of doing smaller independent films where it's, you can maintain that vision. Then you've done larger films where you do have to kind of thread the needle of giving the financiers what they want or the studio what they want. How do you manage that? We talk about that a lot on this YouTube channel because we interview a lot of indie filmmakers.
Yeah.
We interview filmmakers who've done larger movies. There is that sort of like song and dance, and seeing a lot of indie filmmakers cross over to doing big studio work.
Sure.
So many examples. How do you politic that? When is it how do you compare that experience?
Well, unfortunately, that's the word, politics, and it's not a word I'm in love with. And sometimes you do the dance well, and sometimes you don't. Sometimes you don't give them ultimately what they want, I think. And because, the job of producer is to want more and more for less and less. It's like everything from the script on down to the finished product. It's like they give you notes on a script, and it's like, that's great, but we'd love to get in this and this and this, but could you cut 10 pages? So that they give you the impossible request, and that kind of just continues through. The best ones kind of really know script and really know production, but it's not always the case. Sometimes they just know money, and so they feel that their money, that wad of money buys them creativity, and it just doesn't necessarily do that. It doesn't make you a creative person because you had enough money to get the movie made. So it's a strange dance, and it's a different dance every time. It feels like you're always having to learn new steps. So sometimes I feel like I've done it well, and sometimes I feel like I look like an idiot. I may have looked like an idiot every time, but sometimes by the end you've done it well, at least. So it's always nice when you have the control, in the sense that you can at least look at something, and I think House of Darkness falls into the world of that, to be able to say, whether you like it or not, it was what I intended to do. So go ahead and judge it now, and make your tweet, write your review, do your thing, and tell a friend to see it or not. But I don't have to wish there was a disclaimer on there saying, well, gosh, you should know that the producers that it's just, that was what I set out to make.
You're getting a lot of love in our chat. We've got about 400 people watching live right now.
Hello, everybody.
Yeah. So before we get to their questions, I want to talk about your new movie, House of Darkness, how you put this together. Justin Long is stars in it. It's out this weekend, I believe, in theaters.
Right. That's
and then I believe will be on video on demand shortly after. But how did
the window's incredibly short these days.
Yes, it is. Well, look, whatever model towards profitability, that makes the financiers happy, fine. But
Yeah.
what got you here with this? And you even mentioned kind of comparing this. This could be like in the company of women in a sense.
Yeah. Um, the times in which we made it were obviously people were just coming back from, not even coming back from COVID, but just raising their heads. Like people who had been through an apocalypse, like you opening the shelter and going, "Can we breathe out here?" And so movies were being made that were very contained, and this sort of fit the bill. And so obviously it was seen as something that was because there was always that worry of like going back to work and can we get to the end of the production. So with something, almost one location, very small cast, and a short number of days to shoot, the odds were good that it would get done. So that helped, and that brings the movie out to people. But it's one of those things where I've often written these, more contained chamber piece things, and I love that kind of thing that lets actors act, and you can do long takes and that kind of thing. So that brought us to where we were, and we got a chance to go shoot it in Arkansas. Who knew they had castles in Arkansas? But there they are. It was a quick, as I say, shoot, but all nights. It was as difficult as anything because when you have a little bit of time and it's nighttime and the conditions are tough. Had a lot of torrential rain, and so we had plenty to deal with, and yet we got it done. And yeah, you mentioned Justin, but a great cast of people. I mean, Kate Bosworth was there, and they went toe to toe and immediately hit it off. I think they're still hitting it off, as a matter of fact. And Gia Croverton and Lucy Walters. So I got lucky with the cast, and that's with cast and crew. I had a great DP. You're as good as those people that you hire, and if you're smart, you listen to them. You don't just try and tell them what to do. You say, "Hey, you guys have good ideas too, so let's put our heads together and do this thing."
I hope we have time. We got you for maybe 8 more minutes, maybe longer. We'll see.
Whatever you need, go ahead.
Cool. So just some questions from our chat. People watching live. Latino Slant says, "Wow, Neil is the real deal." So there you go.
Thank you.
Barton Bella, that castle in Arkansas is actually haunted. So
I'm glad to hear that now rather than when I was there.
Yeah.
Because it was difficult enough without knowing that it was haunted.
And Patrick Lemire says, in the company of men, along with Sex, Lies, and Videotape, were shown to us in school as examples of you don't need a ton of money to achieve excellence. So
I just got a chance to work with the DP from Sex, Lies, and Videotape, and he was fantastic. And he speaks about it in the same way, that they didn't have a lot of money, but Soderbergh was such a smarty pants right from the beginning that he just made great choices, and they got it made.
And then Patrick Lemire goes on to ask, without giving any names, do you do dialogue punch-ups for others? I mean, as an accomplished writer,
I have in the past for a few things. That's a kind of a tricky thing, for hire. You can make some money that way. They used to do a lot more of it, I think, than they do now. Sometimes they still do it, obviously. I've done a little bit of that work, but I find it sometimes harder to go in and work on somebody else's material, with the expectations and the limitations. Time is often the case. Can you do this as fast as possible? Than just doing your own work. It's nice to have the freedom to have a blank page and create.
Shelby AC asks, question for Neil: what's the best advice a mentor has given you?
Probably the best advice, not that I've given, but that a mentor. I ran into the playwright, also I think filmmaker as well, David Rabe. He wrote Hurly Burly, if you know that play or film. A lot of great plays. I ran into him in a Blockbuster in Westchester County in New York one time, and he was talking about playwrights. And he called us Buffalo and said that we need to stick together. And I think it was such a great thing to say, just because sometimes it can feel like a very lonely pursuit. You spend a lot of time in your home and by yourself and stare at the screen. Um, this is not suggesting that you go out to Starbucks and pretend to write. The idea is, if you go to Starbucks, make sure that you are writing. And I think sticking together is the key to that, of finding a group of people you trust, people that you can show your work to, and really get a lot of times you just need hugs, but if you have somebody who you can really ask the truth about what you've written, I think that's invaluable. So that was one of the best things anybody ever said to me was stick together with other writers.
Dempsey asks, is it true you made an entire movie off the line, "Let's hurt somebody"?
Well, it took a little more work than that. I had to write the rest of the script, but that was definitely the springboard for In the Company of Men. That line got in my head, and I wanted to make sure I wasn't hearing voices and saying, no, I don't want to hurt anybody. I realized that was, oh no, those are characters, and the provocative idea. In fact, when I first wrote it, that was the first line that anybody said, and by the time that the movie existed, I'd kind of flipped that. And when you see the men, they're kind of traveling on their destination to this other town to work for a bit. And by the time they've gone from airport, bar, all those things, and end up in front of their hotel rooms, that's at the end when Aaron Eckhart said to his friend, "Let's hurt somebody." So it just became flipped in the making of it. But yeah, the catalyst was that line.
And just some comments here from people. Patrick Lemire says, "The Shape of Things flips the script. I strongly recommend that film." Okra Vendakai says, "Not the bees." See,
you can't get away from it.
You can't get away from it.
It might end up being on the headstone.
And Dempsey goes on to ask, how big of a role did being educated in so many different places play in influencing your filmmaking?
Filmmaking, not so much, because I'd always been a film lover. I started out very early, just circling movies in the TV guide with my mom and going, oh, she would say, "Oh my gosh, look what's on, Leave Her to Heaven. You've got to see this." And, if we didn't see that at 9:00 on Thursday night, you might not see that movie again. There was a time, it may be hard to believe, you might not see it for another 6 months. Even available, because there wasn't VHS. There were not revival. I mean, there were revival houses, not where I grew up. So I got an education going to the movies, watching movies on TV. And so filmmaking wasn't changed much I was always in school, really working on the English side, or the, English lit, or in theater. But certainly I went to NYU for graduate school. So just being in the city allowed me to see a lot of movies that I couldn't necessarily get my hands on. So that's the beauty of being in a bigger city sometimes. Now things become much more available to people all over the country, and I think that's a great thing. But yeah, so school was just, education's just a huge thing. I mean, one of the biggest influences on me was the public library. That's where I started out, just taking out a stack of books bigger than, higher than my arms up to my head, and read. So that's another thing I would suggest to people still use. I still go to the public library. I love it.
And books, for people don't know, they're like the internet, but on really thin slices of wood. And people would read them back then.
Yeah, one should point that out these days. Less and less that's happening with people. But it's a beautiful thing to hold a good book.
Well, I grew up in that same era, Neil. Like TV
Where
guide.
did you grow up?
I grew up in Michigan.
No,
Royal Oak, Michigan.
I was born in Detroit.
Oh, well, there you go. So
Yeah.
I used to watch Bill Kennedy at the movies. The Ghoul was at night. Sir Graves Ghastly. I would just circle. These are the movies. And watching movies then was an appointment. Like if you didn't see it, it was gone. There was no
Absolutely.
VCR. Like
Yeah.
I would audio record actually movies and TV shows. Just audio recordings.
Amazing. Yeah. It was that's very fun.
Yeah.
the idea of that, because I remember those old cassettes with some kind of interesting control that it would have to snap off or on.
Right.
It was also such a communal thing, not just the idea of going to the movies, but at home. Like it was actual time that I would spend with my father or my mother that you didn't get in other ways. My
Mhm.
dad sitting down to watch. I mean, his menu was more limited. He was really more into westerns, more into war pictures, particularly World War II. So sitting down to watch Where Eagles Dare was a big deal, but how often did that come on? So you kind of really had to let him know, hey, what's on Saturday. And if you hit one of the jackpot, you knew you were going to hang out with him. He was going to make popcorn, and it was going to be an amazing couple hours.
That I'm so glad you brought that up, because it was like when movies like, say, West Side Story or Gone with the Wind were on television, and those were like 2-night events, right?
Like once a year.
Once a year. That was it. If you didn't see
Yeah.
Wizard of Oz
on Halloween.
right. Yeah,
Was
that
it
was
Halloween or was it Thanksgiving? It was one of those. It's like that's when it would come on. And you're right.
Right.
With Gone with the Wind, it took 2 evenings because with ads, they
Right.
had to break it into like 2-hour episodes.
That was you get the popcorn. Family had one television. You were all gathered around it. It was great.
Yeah.
Lot more questions here. Hopefully we can get to most of these. Dempsey asks, do you have a must-read book that you recommend to others?
Gosh, a must-read book. What would I say? I spent a lot of time in the last couple of COVID years trying to catch up on books that you go, oh, I feel like I've read that, and yet maybe I never did. Maybe I saw the movie, maybe I've picked it up a bunch of times, and so I've been going through some Henry James that I hadn't read, and Edith Wharton. I think The Age of Innocence is one of the best books ever written. It was the first woman writer to win the Pulitzer Prize. You could go, in many different ways, but The Age of Innocence is an incredible novel about men and women and New York society, and I thought it was a fantastic read. But I pick me on another day, and I'll pick something wildly different as well. Lord of the Flies, always one of my favorites. So there's a and they're probably a little meaner in Age of Innocence than they are in Lord of the Flies. So
Solomon Thornton asks, what is your process of filmmaking?
Boy, that's big wide question. But what I like is, probably like most people, plenty of time to plan, plenty of time for myself to come up with a good plan that is very flexible. I always try and come in with an idea, and if somebody has a better one, then I am more than happy to steal it and make it my own. I really try and listen to the cast and crew, but know that I'm going to be responsible for it. So, there's going to be I'm protective of my script, but I'm not precious about it. I change stuff on the fly all the time, and yet I'm very careful about writing stuff. Rehearsal is paramount, and yet you find in movies you tend not to get very much of it. People don't want to pay for it because it's a cost that they don't see that goes on the screen. Of course it does, but it's something that's intangible and therefore not cost effective. But I think the best work I've done, I've had more time to rehearse with a cast than not. So I love to do that, but then you got to get in there and when the clock starts ticking and the sun starts going down, you've got to be able to really think on your feet and just get to the end of that day and just stack those days end on end, and pretty soon you've got a movie. So it's a lot of problem solving. It's a lot of making economic choices feel like they're artistic ones, and it's a lot of creating a good environment, creating a great environment for actors, particularly to work in, and then staying out of their way, letting them do the work that they do, trusting them that you hired people, and then you're not going to try and tell them how to do their job, and be there for them the second they need help. And the best ones will ask you for help when they need it. I've worked with some pretty great people, and every one of them at some point, looks at you and says, I don't know, what do you think? Should we do another one? Or what, everybody needs feedback from somebody. And that's what you're there for, is not to make them act the way you would have done it, but the way that they provide the best way for them to do it. And that's, some versions of that are what I've always tried to do.
And Christopher Miller asks, what made you want to make this movie, House of Darkness?
That's a great question. I have made a lot of things that were kind of male female relationship driven, and I wanted to take that idea and meld it into more of a genre piece like this one. And I've always enjoyed Dracula and wanted to. I've adapted it for the stage before and worked on the Van Helsing series, and so I've been very familiar with it and wanted to always like the weird sisters, the kind of people call the brides of Dracula, or they're called the weird sisters in the book, and imagine them in a more contemporary setting, and so play around with a couple of different ideas and meld them into one hopefully cohesive movie.
Cool. And then Patrick Lemire asks, Neil, you seem like such a gentle person, yet can go to fairly dark places. Do you ever surprise or shock yourself?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, everybody does, right? I mean, I have a temper. I have a fuse that it's thankfully very, very long, much shorter than my father's was, but I can get there. I'm tough on myself in terms of doing good work, and I think exacting with people, but not tough on them. I can I can be surprised by things that I like or don't like. It's Yeah, I mean, people hopefully surprise themselves all the time. Why do I want to make this movie? Or why am I reading this? Or, why did I have that interaction with somebody? We're strange creatures, and we have very eclectic tastes and interests. And so I surprise myself probably on a daily basis. And I would imagine you do as well.
Question here, another question from Dempsey. What is your view on the recent slew of remakes, reboots, and reimaginings?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I have been involved with some of those things, and so I think a good story can be retold. I come from the theater, and so plays get redone all the time. I don't know how many Hamlets I've seen in my life, and I've seen some great ones, and I've seen some not as great ones. That's very kind of me. That's a way for me to say bad ones. Um, that if I see another version of Death of a Salesman, I go, hey, yeah, maybe I'll give that a try. Are they trying something new with it? Are they doing something very traditional? So in the theater, you see that all the time. With movies, it used to be in your lifetime you wouldn't see a movie remade, and then or only a couple, and now it's actually happening more and more often. I love something that's new and creative and fresh as much as the next person, I hope. So that's always a special thing when you go to something that has no trappings from something else and it's a new voice or fantastic. But if you can go back to a source and say, oh, I'm going to take on Romeo and Juliet one more time, God bless, on stage or on screen. If you have a take on it that's new and exciting, I'm happy to go there if you go there.
Cool. And final question here from Glenuccio says, what's that special key to making a truly scary horror film? One that just sticks in the viewer's mind for a while.
Well, I mean, if I could bottle that, right? I'm not saying, oh, I wouldn't be here, because I would be here, but it's that you could sell that. because it's, what is that recipe? When you get into making movies, and some of you obviously probably do or watch so many movies that you could go off and make one, or you just love them and you understand um, how they're made, or have seen behind the scenes, or you just still get that wave of watching it for the first time, and you don't know so much about how it is made, but know how it makes you feel. Any of those people, that it's a very, it's what looks so fresh and different and of the moment can often be an exact science, just like comedy. Why is comedy so hard to do? Sometimes what is scary is the difference between one frame, and there's 24 frames a second going by, and and the difference between one frame or three frames is the thing that makes you jump or not jump, or feel some dread growing. I love, I love a good jump scare. I love a high body count. I love a bucket of blood, but I also love movies that have very limited, but the psychological horror is there, and the dread that builds. Someone asked me the other day, well, what's my favorite horror movie, and I was like, I don't know. I admire, I love Psycho, and I admire The Shining so much, because how do you make a movie that's scary when it takes place during the daytime? One of the not easiest things to do, and somehow Kubrick creates an atmosphere where you feel unnerved, at least a lot of the time, and that's not an easy thing to do. As I found out, even with the Wicker Man, a lot of that took place during the day, and I went, oh, so this is why you don't make horror films during the day as much, because it's not as scary. So, you learn as you go. But a movie like Jaws, that when they took what was a disadvantage, that the shark wasn't working that well, and said, well, then damn it, we're not going to show the shark as much, but you are going to fear that thing from the beginning of the movie. Brilliant. And great movie, still love it. Ruined swimming for me forever. Still to this day, like swimming pools, bathtubs, it just, deep water, ruined. But a fantastic movie that if you watch that, the way that he through music and sound and what he doesn't show and does show ratchets up the terror. It's a masterclass. So that's a person right there, Spielberg, who, I don't know of anybody who moves a camera any better than that person.
Do you have time for a few more comment questions? Okay. One BLK Talon says, in the company of men, some scenes shot in Fort Wayne.
Some scenes, meaning all scees. That movie was shot in Fort Wayne in its entirety. I'm trying to think if there was any scene that wasn't. Excuse me. No, Fort Wayne Airport. Yeah, all Fort Wayne.
Cool. And then Jay Gar says, my family is from Fayetteville, Arkansas. Was there anything about that area that you enjoyed while filming?
Yeah, I didn't know the area and really did enjoy it. It was, I didn't realize it was a college town, and I have an affinity for college towns, and there was good food. We hit a lot of rain, and also we were working, as I mentioned earlier, at night. So, your day starts, your part of your day is already gone, and you're waking up and thinking about the next day. So I didn't, it wasn't like a vacation really, but the setting was beautiful. And I got some really good food while I was there, and had a really nice crew. Really, good people who knew what they were doing, but really still not jaded. Loved it. Enjoyed coming to work, and that's a blessing whenever you have a crew who wants to be there, because you don't think of it in like the arts, if you put it in quotes, that you're going to run into people who it's just a job but occasionally you do. And, that person often sticks out. They're just waiting for lunch. They just want their paycheck. And I don't feel that same way. So it's hard to work with someone like that who doesn't love it the same way you do. And so I felt like I was surrounded by people who loved what they did. And that was a good feeling.
There's an interesting question here from Christopher Miller. Does it help you psychologically when you make something dark to deal with real life? Kind of like a musician writing a song to release it from themselves?
Interesting. I don't know. I guess so. I mean, I have just a really good, healthy sense of, this is fiction and this is life, and so I can watch lots of dark stuff and not drag it over into my life. It doesn't make me want to go out and do the same thing necessarily, or I can compartmentalize pretty easily in the same way of creating those things. I tend not to be a writer who pulls from their own life. So it isn't like I had all these dark things happen, and therefore I have to put them on paper, and it's going to help me. There's a couple of pieces that I've probably had experiences that allowed me to access stories more directly or closely because I've had some experience in that world, but only a couple. It's usually the old, I've got to use my imagination and create a story and hope that whole thing holds water and works. So it's not me, using theater as therapy or films as a way to work out my demons. It's simply, where do the writing gods, where do the muses take you? When you come up with a story and you bash it around in your head for a while until you go, yeah, no, I think it's a good one, I think I'm going to write that. I tend not to question those things and go, oh gosh, is that some memory I'm drawing up from my childhood? I go, no, there's a good story there and I'm going to tell it. So I tend not to think that it's freeing in that way. It's just simply part of the job to try and me tell you a good story, and you say, out of all the shit that's out there, I'm going to go listen to yours tonight, or go to the theater, or go to a cinema. And that's a big job, that you're taking somebody's time up and taking their money. So hopefully you provide something worthwhile.
Well, Neil, I want to thank you for spending time on the Film Threat livecast here. Fellow Detroiter, I didn't realize you were in the Michigan Mafia.
There you go.
I don't know if you've heard that term, Michigan Mafia.
I have heard. Yeah, my father was from the UP, so that's an even scarier group. Frankly, they would make mincemeat of that mafia. That was the Upper Peninsula is an interesting place, but yeah, my brother and I were both born in Detroit.
That's great. Congratulations on the new film. House of Darkness is in theaters now, and it's also coming to VOD shortly. So look that up. You're getting a lot of love in the chat here. George Glass, great interview. Andrea, Susie, thank you, Neil. Akanika, appreciate your time and thoughtful answers, Neil. Goober says that was so insightful. Thanks. So
thank
Neil,
you.
Yeah. And Neil, when you have another movie, just please come back. We'd love
that.
That would
be a pleasure. Thanks a lot. Great to talk to you.
Awesome. All right. Take care, Neil. Thanks again.
So long.
Later. Bye now.